I was standing in the driveway of the house my daughter and her husband had moved into 3 years ago, a house whose down payment I had quietly covered, when my son-in-law opened the front door just wide enough to look past me at the street, as though checking whether anyone had seen me arrive. "This isn't really a good time," he said. "Heather's tired." I was holding a container of butter tarts I had baked that morning, the good ones with the runny centers, the way my daughter had loved since she was 7 years old. "She called and asked me to come," I said. He shrugged and the door closed. Not slammed, not even firmly. Just closed the way you close a door on something that no longer matters. I stood there for a moment in the cold November air. That particular kind of November cold that settles into southern Ontario like it plans to stay. And I looked at the butter tarts in my hands, and I thought, how long have I been doing this? How many years have I been arriving at doors with something warm, hoping it would be enough? I drove back to my house in Guelph. 47 minutes. I know exactly how long it takes, because I have driven that stretch of highway more times than I can count. I drove it the day they moved in. I drove it every time they needed something. The week the furnace broke. The month he lost his contract work. The year the twins were born and Heather called me every other day because she was exhausted and he was not helping and the grocery bills had tripled. I had answered every single time. When I got home, I set the butter tarts on the kitchen counter. I did not eat any. I sat down at the table and I stayed there while the light changed in the window, going from gray afternoon to the deep purple blue of a November evening, the kind of sky that feels like a bruise. My name is Dorothy. I am 63 years old. I spent 28 years teaching elementary school in Wellington County, and I retired on a pension that, by most standards, is modest. I live in the same house I bought with my late husband in 1991. I drive a 2014 Civic with 240,000 kilometers on it. I patch things when they break. I buy groceries on Tuesdays when the senior discount applies. I have not taken a real vacation since 2017 because every time I looked at my savings account, there was less in it than there should have been. That evening, sitting at the kitchen table in the dark, I finally let myself understand why. I got up and went to the filing cabinet in the spare bedroom, the one my husband used to call the paper monster because it was always overflowing. I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out the accordion folder I had labeled, in my own neat handwriting, Heather and Kevin, Household. I carried it back to the kitchen table, turned on the lamp, and began going through it. I do not know how long I sat there, long enough for the tea I made to go completely cold, long enough that the street outside went quiet. Page by page, transfer by transfer, I counted. The down payment on the house, $62,000, framed at the time as a loan, we never wrote down. Monthly top-ups to their joint account when Kevin's invoicing was slow, 37 separate e-transfers over 4 years, the minivan lease, my name, my credit, their payments, until the payments stopped coming and I absorbed them without a word. The twins' daycare gap when they were waitlisted at the subsidized center, and the private one cost $1,900 a month, 11 months fully covered by me. Heather's dental work when Kevin switched them to a plan with lower coverage, 4 visits, 2 crowns. The generator they bought for the cottage they rented on Georgian Bay, charged to my visa, just temporarily. School supplies. Winter jackets. A week of groceries here, 2 weeks there, because they texted that things were tight, and I could not bear the thought of my grandchildren not eating well. I laid the papers out across the table until there was no more room. 89 separate transactions. 89 times I had reached into my own future and handed pieces of it to them. I sat very still. The November, sitting at the bottom of my rough calculation, was not one I had ever let myself see clearly before. And yet it was there, patient and exact, the way the truth always is when you finally stop looking away from it. I thought about my furnace, which had been making a sound for 2 winters that I kept meaning to have looked at. I thought about the crown on my lower left molar that my dentist had flagged 18 months ago. I thought about the trip to Prince Edward Island that I had told myself I would take when things settled down, not understanding for years that things were never going to settle down on their own. I closed the folder. The sound it made was small, but in that kitchen at that hour, it sounded like something ending. I went to bed. I did not sleep much. In the morning, I made an appointment. RBC has been my bank since I was 19 years old. The branch in downtown Guelph, the one on Wyndham Street, has the same arrangement of chairs it has had for 30 years and always smells faintly of carpet cleaner and old paper. I have always found it oddly comforting. The advisor who saw me that morning was a woman in her early 40s named Andrea. Sharp eyes, practical manner, the kind of person who does not waste words. I set my accordion folder on the desk between us, and I told her what I needed. I need to cancel every automatic transfer, every pre-authorized payment, every line of credit access that is not solely in my name and my control. I need to review every account, every authorization, and I need it done today. Andrea looked at the folder. She looked at me. "All of them?" she said. "All of them," I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she opened her computer and began. We were 40 minutes into the process when she paused. "Mrs. Dorothy," she said, adjusting her tone to something careful, "I need to show you something." She turned the screen so I could see it. There had been an inquiry on my home equity line of credit 6 weeks earlier, a request to increase the limit and add a secondary authorized user. The request had come in online. The texts were consistent with my profile, but the security question had been answered incorrectly twice before a correct answer went through. The name submitted as the secondary user was Kevin's. The room felt very still, not silent. I could hear phones ringing somewhere beyond the frosted glass partition, hear the low hum of the ventilation system, but within that small office, still. "Was that you?" Andrea asked, already knowing it was not. "No," I said. "The request was flagged and suspended pending identity verification," she said. "It did not go through. But Dorothy, this is not something that happens by accident. I thought about the cottage trip, about the week Kevin had asked to borrow my laptop because his was being repaired, about the morning I came downstairs and found him at the kitchen table with it open, who I assumed was working, and how he had closed it slightly when I walked in, and how I had not thought anything of it because I trusted him the way you trust family, which is to say without checking. I need fraud alerts on everything," I said. "Every account, I need the HELOC frozen, I need my SIN flagged, and I need a copy of every document related to that inquiry." Andrea wrote everything down. Her pen moved quickly. "I'm also going to recommend you contact Equifax and TransUnion directly. Request a credit freeze today if you can." "I will," I said. When I walked out of that bank, the air on Wyndham Street was sharp and bright, the kind of November morning that looks warmer than it is. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment and breathed it in. 43 years I had managed my own finances, filed my own taxes, built a life on a teacher's salary while raising a daughter on my own after her father died. I had not come this far to have someone quietly walk through the unlocked door. That afternoon I called a paralegal I had worked with years ago when I updated my will after my husband passed. I explained the situation. She listened without interrupting, which I appreciated. "Keep every record," she said. "The bank documentation, the inquiry, the transfer history, all of it. And Dorothy, change your will. Now, not next week." I made the appointment for Thursday. The messages started that evening. The first came from Heather at 6:47 p.m. "Mom, Kevin says there's an issue with a transfer. Something got canceled. Can you call me?" Not a question mark, a period. As if the answer were already obvious and we were only waiting for me to provide it, I did not call. At 7:15, another message. Mom, the daycare pre-authorized payment didn't go through. Can you fix this? At 7:52, Kevin. Dorothy. Not sure what's going on, but a few things have come up. Can we talk? Not urgent, but sooner is better. Not urgent. Sooner is better. I set the phone face down on the kitchen counter and went to water my houseplants. I have 6 of them, arranged on the windowsill above the sink. A peace lily, 2 pothos, a snake plant, a small fern that refuses to die despite my best efforts, and a Christmas cactus that my mother gave me in 1994 and that has bloomed every single December since. I watered each one carefully, making sure not to overwater the fern. By 9 p.m., the tone had shifted. Mom, this is actually urgent. The insurance payment bounced for the van. That's a real problem. Dorothy, I need you to respond. We have things that depend on these payments. Heather is really upset. Please call. I read each message as it arrived. I did not respond to any of them. I went to bed at 10 and, for the first time in a long time, I slept. The next morning, they came to the house. I was at the kitchen table with my coffee and the crossword. I do the Globe and Mail crossword every morning, have for 30 years. It is one of the small disciplines I allow myself. When I heard a car door slam out front. Then another. The sound of 2 people moving quickly, which is a different sound than 2 people moving normally. I got up and looked out the window. Heather was already at the front door. Kevin was a few steps behind her, hands in his jacket pockets, looking up at the house the way someone looks at a building they are assessing. I opened the door before she could knock. She was wearing the expression I recognized from when she was 14 and had done something she knew was wrong but was not prepared to admit. Chin slightly forward, eyes bright, but not with anything warm. Mom, what is going on? Come in, I said. Both of you. They sat at the kitchen table. I remained standing for a moment, then thought better of performing the moment, and sat across from them. I had the accordion folder on the table beside me. I had also printed the bank documentation Andrea had given me and clipped it to the inside cover. I need to tell you both something, I said. And I need you to listen without interrupting because this is a long time coming and I don't want to have to say it twice. Heather opened her mouth. Please, I said. She closed it. I have spent the last 12 years, I said, covering things for this family that were not mine to cover. The temp payment on your home, the van, the daycare, the dental work. 89 separate transactions totaling an amount that I will not say out loud because it will make me too angry to continue. Kevin shifted in his chair. I did these things, I said, because I love my daughter, because I love my grandchildren, and because somewhere along the way I told myself that being a good mother meant never letting you feel the weight of anything. That was my mistake. Not generosity. The assumption that generosity and self-erasure are the same. Heather's expression had changed. The 10 was no longer forward. Mom, I am not finished. I opened the folder and slid the printed bank page across the table. 3 weeks ago, someone used my laptop to submit an inquiry on my home equity line of credit. The request attempted to add a secondary authorized user. The name on that request was Kevin's. The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. Kevin looked at the paper. He did not look at me. That was, he started. Don't, I said quietly. Don't tell me what it was. The bank flagged it. It did not go through. But I have a copy of every detail of that inquiry, and I have spoken to a paralegal, and I want you to understand very clearly that I know what happened. Heather looked at her husband. Something moved across her face that I had not seen before. Not anger at me. Something else. Kevin, she said. He said nothing. I continued. Every automatic transfer has been canceled. My accounts are under fraud alerts. My will is being revised. My credit is frozen, and the home equity line is locked. I paused. If you have questions about your own finances going forward, I would encourage you to speak with the financial advisor, but I am no longer in a position to answer those questions for you. Kevin stood up. He looked like a man who had walked into a room expecting one kind of conversation and found a completely different one. "This is an overreaction," he said. "Kevin." Heather's voice was very quiet. "Sit down." He did not sit down. He walked to the front door. "I'll be in the car," he said, and left. The door closed with exactly the same sound as the one the night before. Not slammed, just closed. Heather and I sat across from each other. She was looking at the table. After a moment, she looked up, and I saw what was underneath the expression she had come in wearing. She looked exhausted. She looked, suddenly, younger than her 34 years. "I didn't know," she said, "about the laptop, about the HELOC." "I believe you," I said. And I did. She pressed her fingers to her eyes. "I knew we were relying on you too much. I told him that last spring. I told him we needed to figure out our own things. He said it was fine, that you didn't mind." "I did mind," I said gently. "I never said so. That is also on me." She cried then, not dramatically, not for long, the kind of crying that happens when something you have been holding tightly finally releases. I handed her a tissue from the box I keep on the counter, and I let her have the moment without trying to fix it. After a while, she said, "What happens now?" "Now you figure it out," I said. "Both of you, or separately, that part is up to you. But you figure it out. You have 2 incomes and a home, and you are smart, capable people. You do not need me to run the background of your lives. We've been spending more than—" She stopped. Started again. "We've been living like we had more than we do." "I know," I said. "I'm sorry, Mom." I reached across the table and put my hand on hers. "I know you are, and I love you." That hasn't moved an inch. But love isn't the same as a line of credit, and I should have made that clear a long time ago. She left 20 minutes later. Kevin was still in the car. I watched through the window as she got in and he pulled out of the driveway without looking back at the house. The weeks that followed were not quiet. Through neighbors and an old friend who knew people, as tends to happen in a city like Guelph, where everyone is eventually connected to everyone, I heard things. The minivan was returned. Kevin's business had apparently been in trouble longer than anyone knew, and without the various threads I had been quietly maintaining, several things came undone at once. The twins shifted to the subsidized daycare, the one they'd been waitlisted for originally, which came through in January. There were apparently conversations about the house, whether to keep it, whether to sell, whether they could carry the mortgage on a tighter budget. I did not insert myself into any of it. I also heard from the paralegal that Kevin had consulted a lawyer about the HELOC inquiry, testing to see whether there were grounds to challenge the bank's flag. There were not. The lawyer apparently told him to leave it alone, and he did. What I did not hear for almost 6 weeks was from my daughter. I thought about her often. I kept her number unblocked. I did not call first because I had decided that the next step had to come from her. In January, on a Thursday afternoon when the snow was coming down in the way it does in southern Ontario, steady, patient, indifferent, my phone rang. "Mom," she said, "can I come over? Just me." She arrived an hour later, still in her work clothes, a scarf wound twice around her neck. She had taken the GO train, she said. Kevin had the van. I made tea. She sat at the kitchen table in the same chair she had been sitting in since she was old enough to sit at a table. I put a butter tart in front of her without asking. She looked at it for a moment, then picked it up. "We're seeing a financial counselor," she said, "together. It's through the credit union. They offer it for free. She paused. I made the appointment. I didn't ask Kevin. I just told him we were going. Good, I said. She says we've been spending about 40% more than we earn. Every year. The gap has just been. She gestured vaguely, and I understood. The gap had been me. Kevin moved out for a few weeks, she said. He's back now. We're working on it. I don't know how it's going to go. She looked out the window at the snow. I feel stupid for not seeing it sooner. You were inside it, I said. It's hard to see the shape of something when you're standing in the middle. She looked at me then. How long did you know? I didn't, I said honestly. Not all of it, not the full picture. I didn't let myself look. She nodded slowly. Then, are you okay? Financially, I mean. Did we? She stopped. I will be, I said. It will take some time to rebuild what I let go, but I have my pension. I have this house. I have my health. I paused. I booked a trip. She looked up. Prince Edward Island. The last 2 weeks of August. I rented a small cottage near Cavendish. I'm going alone, and I intend to sit on the porch and read an embarrassing number of novels and eat as much lobster as I want. Something shifted in her face. She laughed, quietly but genuinely. Good, she said. You should. We talked for another hour, the way we used to talk before everything became about logistics and transfers and things that needed to be handled. She told me about the twins, who were doing well, who had both apparently developed a passionate and specific interest in dinosaurs. She told me about a course she was thinking of taking in the spring, something in project management, something that might help her move up at work. When she stood to leave, she hugged me in the hallway with both arms and held on for a moment longer than she needed to. I'm sorry it took this, she said quietly. So am I said. But we're here now. I watched her walk down the front steps and along the snowy sidewalk to the corner where she turned toward the station. I stood in the doorway until she was out of sight. Then I went inside, shut the door against the cold, and went to the kitchen. I had been planning to make a batch of butter tarts for a neighbor down the street, a woman in her 70s who had recently lost her husband and who I'd been meaning to look in on for weeks. I got out the flour, the brown sugar, the corn syrup, the butter. I turned on the radio to the CBC, the afternoon program, voices I have been listening to for decades. On the counter where the accordion folder used to sit, there was nothing. I had put it through the shredder 2 days after the meeting with Andrea. Every bank statement, every transfer record, every invoice, all of it. Because I did not need evidence anymore. The accounts were protected. The will was updated. The credit was frozen. The past was documented where it needed to be and released where it needed to be let go. I rolled out the pastry and cut it into rounds the way my mother taught me, pressing each one into the muffin tin with 2 thumbs. The filling went in, dark and sweet, and a little runny the way it should be. I slid the tray into the oven and set the timer. Then I went and sat in the chair by the window in the living room, the one that gets the afternoon light even in January, and I let myself just sit. Kevin's inquiry into my accounts was still being reviewed by the bank's fraud department. What came of it, I could not say. That part was no longer mine to manage. What I knew was this. For the first time, in longer than I could clearly remember, my financial life was mine. My name was on the things that carried my name and nothing else. The house I lived in was the house I would leave to whoever I chose. The savings I had left were the savings I would decide how to use. There is a particular kind of quiet that comes not from the absence of noise, but from the absence of dread. I sat in that chair and I felt it settle around me the way good light does. Not dramatic, not sudden, just present. The timer went off. I got up, pulled the butter tarts from the oven, and set them on the rack to cool. The smell filled the kitchen the way it always has, the way it did when I was a girl watching my own mother do the same. Warm sugar and butter and something underneath it that I never have been able to name, but that has always meant, to me, here, home, yours. I put on my coat and my warmest scarf, tucked 6 tarts into a tin, and walked down the street to knock on my neighbor's door. She answered, surprised, and then not surprised, the way people are when kindness arrives in a small form they recognize. "I thought you might like some company," I said. She smiled and stepped back to let me in. I think about that November evening often, not with bitterness. That surprised me, actually, how little bitterness I carry now, but with the quiet recognition of someone who finally looked at something she had been walking around for years. What I had called love for a long time was really a kind of fear. Fear that if I stopped being useful, I would stop being wanted. Fear that saying no would mean losing what little closeness remained. And so I kept giving, kept absorbing, kept telling myself that this was what good mothers did. It took a closed door, my daughter's door, in a house I helped buy, to make me understand that I had confused being needed with being valued. Those are not the same thing. They never were. Heather is not a bad person. I want to be clear about that, the way I was clear with her sitting at my kitchen table in January. She had been living inside a set of assumptions that I had helped build and never once challenged. When you never name the cost of something, people stop believing it has one. That is not entirely her fault. It is in part mine. I was the one who kept a folder in the bottom drawer and never opened it in front of anyone. I was the one who paid without saying what it meant. Honesty is its own kind of generosity, and I had withheld it for a long time. Kevin is a different matter. What he did, attempting to access my home equity line without my knowledge, was not a moment of weakness or poor judgment. It was a decision, and the thing about decisions like that is that they carry consequences that follow honestly, without needing anyone to arrange them. He did not need me to punish him. He needed the door to close and the reality to settle, the way it always does eventually, for people who have been propped up past their actual footing. What I know now, that I did not fully understand at 62, is that genuine care for the people you love requires a particular kind of clarity, not coldness, clarity. The willingness to see a situation as it actually is, not as you wish it were. The willingness to ask hard questions of yourself. What am I really doing here? And who does it actually serve? I had been telling myself I was helping my daughter. I was also avoiding a conversation I did not want to have. Both things were true at once. Abby. Heather's daughter, my granddaughter, 8 years old and already very sure about dinosaurs, will grow up watching her mother work through something difficult, honestly, that matters more than any amount I could have transferred into an account. The example of a woman who straightened her own footing and did not collapse is worth more than 6 months of subsidized daycare. I believe that. I believe it. The way I believe it compound interest, slowly, then undeniably. The Christmas cactus my mother gave me in 1994 bloomed again this December. It always does. It does not need much. A window, a little water, the patience to be left alone long enough to do what it was always capable of doing. I have been thinking about that more than is probably reasonable. I booked the cottage on Prince Edward Island, August. 2 weeks. I have already made a list of novels.